She's stunning, the kind of beauty that turns heads, melts logic, and makes you question your standards. But beneath that surface is a war you were never supposed to survive. And it doesn't hit all at once. It hits in patterns, in silence, in guilt you were never meant to carry. It hits in the way she twists your words, tests your patience, then flips the blame back on you. You start asking yourself, am I the problem? Is this normal? Am I just not man enough to handle her? And that's the trap. Because immature women don't break you with one big betrayal. They do it in pieces, through small withdrawals of respect, delayed affection, constant emotional games, until one day you realize you're not leading your life anymore. You're reacting to hers. But here's what makes the pain worse. She's beautiful. She's magnetic. She's mastered the art of looking like everything you ever wanted, while being the very thing that erodes your worth. And that's why most men stay too long, because we're told, don't walk away from a beautiful woman. But high-value men, they know the truth. Beauty without emotional maturity is a slow form of self-destruction. And if you've ever stayed longer than you should have, if you've ever sacrificed peace for a pretty face, if you've ever loved a woman who made you feel like a stranger in your own skin, then this video was made for you. This is episode 2 of a private 4-part series, built for men who are done bleeding in silence, done playing nice with dysfunction, and done mistaking attraction for alignment. We're going to break down exactly why high-value men walk early, even when every part of them wants to stay. And once you understand what's really going on, you'll never look at her the same way again. 1. Because peace is more valuable than beauty. She may look like everything you've ever wanted, the curves, the voice, the soft smile that says, I'm different. But what she never says out loud, and what most men learn too late, is that her beauty comes with a price, and that price is your peace. It doesn't show up immediately. In the beginning, the connection feels electric. She keeps your attention. She draws you in with her charm, her chaos, her unpredictability. It's intoxicating, and that's the trap. You confuse intensity with intimacy, drama with depth, and emotional volatility with passion, until one day, you wake up tense. You check your phone, wondering if she's mad at you. You hesitate before speaking, not because you're unsure, but because you're calculating how she might twist it. Your entire nervous system starts living in defense mode, and you call that love. Most men stay. They tell themselves she's just emotional, that she'll grow out of it. But deep down, they're not in a relationship. They're in a psychological battle. Because when a woman lacks emotional maturity, her presence becomes noise, loud, demanding, confusing. There's no clarity, no safety, no grounding, just waves of emotional instability wrapped in a beautiful disguise. And the man who doesn't value peace will chase that until he's drained, distracted, and disconnected from his own power. But high-value men, they walk. Not because they don't feel the pull, not because they don't see the beauty, but because they know this truth. A beautiful woman who destroys your peace is more dangerous than 1,000 enemies. She'll drain your focus, make you question your reality, and rob you of the very stillness you need to lead, build, and protect. Because peace isn't a luxury. For a high-value man, peace is survival. It's what separates him from chaos. It's where his discipline lives. It's what keeps his mission alive. And any woman, no matter how attractive, who threatens that peace is not a gift. She's a test. And the men who fail that test end up broken, bitter, or blind. But the men who pass, they don't raise their voice. They don't beg for understanding. They don't try to fix the fire. They walk calmly, quietly, completely, because they've learned peace isn't what you find when things go right. Peace is what you protect when someone starts going wrong. And once a high-value man realizes that, he never trades it for beauty again. But beauty isn't the only mask emotional chaos hides behind. Sometimes it's dressed as love, even while it quietly becomes abuse. 2. Because emotional immaturity becomes emotional abuse over time. At first, you think she's just going through something. She overreacts, gets sensitive, takes things personally, but you explain it away. You tell yourself she's been hurt, that you need to be patient, that real men don't run from emotionally wounded women. But what you don't realize is this: emotional immaturity is not harmless. It doesn't stay small. It grows, and over time, it mutates into something much darker, something that doesn't just confuse you, it breaks you. It starts with overreactions. She accuses you of saying things you never said. She spins normal conversations into emotional battles. She cries, yells, withdraws, all in the span of an hour, and leaves you questioning your tone, your words, your intentions. You go from confident to cautious, from clear to confused, from leading to apologizing for things that weren't even wrong. You stop being yourself, and you start being who she needs you to be to keep the peace. And that's not peace. That's control. This is what emotional abuse looks like when it's dressed in innocence. She doesn't hit you. She hits your self-worth. She doesn't scream insults. She slowly erodes your identity, one guilt trip at a time. You start analyzing everything you say before you say it. You feel anxious when she doesn't text back. You feel punished when you don't validate her every emotion. And here's the most dangerous part. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to tell where she ends and you begin. That's what emotional chaos does. It infects your clarity, poisons your standards, and reprograms you to think this is normal. But high-value men don't fall for this. They understand that a woman who can't regulate her emotions will eventually try to control yours. And once that begins, it's no longer about patience. It's about self-preservation. Because a relationship isn't measured by how much pain you can tolerate. It's measured by how much peace you can maintain while growing together. And if the only way she feels loved is through chaos, control, or crisis, that's not love. That's survival. And high-value men don't date to survive. They date to thrive. So when the emotional instability starts to feel like a trap, they don't argue, they don't fix, they exit. Because what starts as drama always ends as damage. But emotional chaos isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up in silence, in subtle daily disrespect that never gets corrected. And the men who tolerate that, they lose more than time. They lose themselves. 3. Because high-value men don't negotiate with disrespect. Disrespect doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through eye rolls, dismissive sighs, sarcastic jabs, and silence that cuts deeper than words. At first, you let it slide. You tell yourself she's emotional, stressed, just in a mood. You justify the little shots to your pride because you care about her, because you don't want to be too sensitive, because you're trying to be patient. But what starts as one moment of unchecked disrespect becomes a pattern, then a language, then a power dynamic. She begins to test the limits, seeing how far she can push without consequence. She interrupts you mid-sentence, mocks your opinions in front of others, downplays your boundaries with a joke, a smirk, or a passive-aggressive, "Oh, relax." And if you call it out, suddenly you're the problem. You're overreacting. You're too controlling. she turns it on you. And now, instead of setting a boundary, you're defending your reaction to her disrespect. It's strategic, whether she realizes it or not. The moment she realizes she can disrespect you without losing you, she stops respecting you entirely. This is the slow erosion of masculine authority, not through confrontation, but through corrosion. And this is where most men fold. They argue, they try to explain themselves, they lower their tone, shrink their standards, soften their words, just to keep the connection alive. But in doing so, they lose the one thing that connection should have been built on: respect. High-value men don't negotiate here. They don't tolerate women who confuse emotional expression with emotional entitlement. They don't make space for sarcasm disguised as communication. And they don't stay loyal to a relationship that's slowly teaching them to second-guess their voice. Because to a high-value man, disrespect is not just an insult, it's a warning sign, a forecast of what the future holds if he doesn't leave now. And he knows, if you allow a woman to disrespect you once without consequence, you've trained her to do it again. It's not about being dominant. It's not about ego. It's about protecting your mental clarity, emotional balance, and masculine dignity. So when a woman makes it clear, through words, tone, or silence, that she no longer respects your position as a man, you don't debate, you don't defend, you don't plead, you disappear. Because a woman can only destroy what you give her access to, and high-value men guard their access like their life depends on it. Because in many ways, it does. But sometimes, she doesn't need to say a word to disrespect you. She just needs to keep seeking attention from men who aren't you. And the moment you notice that pattern, you realize it's not love anymore. It's a performance. 4. Because he knows attention is her currency, and he refuses to fund it. She says she's loyal, says she loves you, says you're the only one that matters. But somehow, she still needs the eyes of every other man in the room. She posts the thirst traps. She likes photos of guys she used to talk to. She keeps the DM door half open, never cheating, just flirting with the line. And when you bring it up, she tells you you're insecure, that you're being controlling, that it's just Instagram. But it's never just about the platform. It's about the pattern. Because immature women don't seek depth, they seek validation. And attention is their currency. It feeds their self-worth. It makes them feel powerful. And they don't care if that attention comes from strangers, exes, or men who would replace you in a heartbeat. And here's the worst part. You could be everything: focused, loyal, emotionally present, and still, she'll look elsewhere for the spotlight. Because your presence isn't exciting. It's expected. And in her world, if she's not being chased, she doesn't feel alive. Most men get trapped here. They try harder. They chase more. They argue. They scroll her likes, check her follows, look for signs, and she watches. Because now she's got you dancing. Now you're competing. Now she knows you're afraid to lose her. That's power, and she feeds on it. But a high-value man? He doesn't compete with the crowd. He doesn't chase what disrespects him. He doesn't play games to keep her attention. Because he knows, if a woman needs outside validation to feel valuable, she'll never respect the man giving her stability. She'll treat his peace as boring, his presence as predictable, and his loyalty as weakness. So he doesn't argue. He doesn't check her phone. He doesn't try to outshine the noise. He simply detaches, because he understands something most men never learn. The moment a woman seeks more attention from other men than she gives to the man she's with, the relationship is already over. It just hasn't been buried yet. And high-value men don't stick around to watch the funeral. They leave early, with their self-worth intact. Because a woman who makes you compete for her focus is preparing to replace you. And the moment she feels that power shift back into her hands, she'll start using your attraction against you, not just to test you, but to punish you. And the way she does it isn't always explosive. Sometimes she wears the mask of intimacy, while slowly pulling you into the fire. If this is hitting something real for you, it's because this series was built exactly for men like you, men who are done being drained and ready to see it all for what it really is. Stick around. The next few truths cut even deeper. 5. Because her beauty is a disguise, not a solution. She's beautiful, undeniably. She walks in and the room shifts, eyes follow, voices lower, energy bends, and for a moment, you forget everything you know. You forget the red flags. You forget the stress, the confusion, the emotional mess. Because her beauty makes it easier to lie to yourself. You tell yourself she's just misunderstood, that she needs time, patience, love, that maybe the chaos is your fault. Maybe you just don't know how to handle a woman like her. But deep down, a part of you already knows you're not in love. You're under the influence. Because beauty, when it's not paired with emotional maturity, becomes a weapon. It clouds your logic. It delays your exit. It keeps you hoping she'll change, long after the damage has already begun. This is what most men fall for, not her voice, not her body, not even the sex. They fall for the potential they project onto her, because she looks like someone worth waiting for. But here's the truth. High-value men learn. Beauty doesn't build peace. It doesn't protect your purpose. It doesn't fix emotional chaos. It only distracts you from seeing it clearly. And over time, that distraction turns into destruction. You start bending your standards. You overlook things you never would have tolerated. You begin to think that walking away from her is a kind of failure, when it's actually the beginning of freedom. High-value men don't fall for masks. They see beyond the makeup, the seduction, the soft voice that hides a sharp tongue. They understand that beauty without maturity is like a sports car with no brakes, flashy, powerful, thrilling, and completely fatal when things go wrong. So when the tension builds, when the patterns reveal themselves, when the emotional weight gets too heavy to ignore, they don't get louder, they don't beg, they don't work on it, they walk. Because no matter how perfect she looks, if she doesn't bring peace, she's already taking power. And any woman who relies solely on her appearance to hold you was never trying to connect with your soul, only your weakness. But for the man who's been here before, who's been burned and bled for the wrong kind of beauty, he doesn't just walk away, he never walks in again. Because he's already learned, the most expensive mistake a man can make is confusing beauty for alignment. And the ones who survive that mistake, they carry a scar, not from her hands, but from his own silence. And that scar becomes his shield, the reason he never ignores the warning signs again. 6. Because he's been burned before, and he refuses to bleed again. There's a moment every man remembers, that moment when he stayed too long, when he ignored the signs, when he let her beauty, her body, or her potential blind him to the truth. She didn't scream, she didn't hit, she didn't cheat. But somehow, she drained him, slowly, silently, until the strongest parts of him went numb. And it wasn't just the relationship that hurt. It was what it cost him. His focus, his discipline, his peace, his ability to trust himself again. Because when you fall for the wrong woman, deeply, blindly, you don't just lose her. You lose time. You lose clarity. You lose momentum that took years to build. Most men repeat the cycle. They chalk it up to bad luck. They run toward the next pretty face, hoping this one will be different. But high-value men, they remember. They remember the emotional whiplash. They remember the manipulation, the gaslighting, the mental exhaustion of constantly trying to make it work. They remember how silence became a weapon and intimacy became a leash. And once a man sees that pattern for what it is, not love, but emotional warfare, he refuses to step into it again. It's not that he's bitter. It's not that he doesn't feel. It's that he's been through the fire, and he came out harder, colder, sharper. Because men don't become high value by luck. They become high value by losing themselves once and deciding it would never happen again. He doesn't need to argue. He doesn't need closure. He doesn't need to prove his point. He needs one thing: distance. Because he knows the warning signs now. The emotional chaos hidden behind flirtation, the way immature women mask instability with affection, the way guilt is used like a leash, the way beauty is used like a cage. And the moment he sees it begin again, he cuts the cord early, because he's not trying to fix her. He's trying to protect himself. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom forged in pain. He's not running from her. He's honoring the man he had to fight to become. Because one emotional war was enough. And he knows, if he ever forgets the cost, he'll pay it again. But some women don't accept when a man grows stronger. They'll call him cold. They'll call him distant. They'll call him heartless. All because they can no longer control him. And when guilt stops working, they reach for something sharper. 7. Because he doesn't fall for the guilt game. At first it looks like emotion, tears, silence, the trembling voice that says, "You're hurting me." The innocent tone that whispers, "I just need more reassurance." But the longer you stay, the clearer it becomes. This isn't emotion. It's control. Because every time you try to lead, every time you set a boundary, every time you say no to the emotional chaos, she flips the script. Now you're the villain. Now you're emotionally unavailable. Now you're cold, distant, unsafe. And suddenly, the entire conversation is no longer about what she did. It's about how your reaction made her feel. This is the guilt trap. The moment she realizes you care about how she feels, she uses it, not for connection, but for power. She turns your empathy into a leash, your emotional availability into a target, your desire for peace into a weapon she can twist every time she doesn't get her way. And this is where most men surrender. They apologize for things they didn't do. They start explaining themselves over and over, just to earn back peace. They adjust, soften, step back, until they're no longer men. They're emotional caretakers in a relationship built on landmines. But high-value men don't play this game, because they know, the second a woman uses guilt to control your truth, she's not loving you. She's managing you. And real men don't get managed. So he doesn't yell. He doesn't debate. He doesn't explain his boundaries like he needs permission to keep them. He simply stands firm, no matter how uncomfortable it makes her, because her discomfort is not his responsibility. Her growth is not his job. Her tears are not his fault when they're born from accountability, not cruelty. High-value men know the difference between emotional depth and emotional manipulation. They don't carry guilt for enforcing standards. They don't internalize shame when a woman can't handle truth spoken with calm. Because they've learned, the right woman will respond to masculine clarity with respect, not weaponized emotion. And when a woman repeatedly flips reality to avoid accountability, he doesn't fight her over the truth. He lets her keep her version. while he quietly removes himself from the story. Because guilt only works on a man who doubts his value. And high-value men? They don't question their worth. They protect it. Because when a man finally stops falling for guilt, he becomes untouchable. And when a woman can no longer use guilt to manipulate him, she reaches for the only thing she has left. She questions his worth, his masculinity, his value. And that's where we end this, with the final reason he walks. Because he knows what he's worth, and he refuses to waste it. 8. Because he knows his worth, and he refuses to waste it. Every man has a moment where he looks in the mirror and asks himself, what am I doing here? Not just in the relationship, but in his own life, in his mission, in his values, in his direction. And the answer, if he's honest, often reveals something uncomfortable. He's wasting himself, wasting his energy on emotional ping-pong matches, wasting his time trying to decode mixed signals and mood swings, wasting his patience walking circles around a woman who doesn't want to grow, just to keep her from falling apart. And for what? For beauty? For history? For fear of starting over? But high-value men reach a point, not out of arrogance, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. A point where they see the truth. The more time you give to the wrong woman, the less of you there is left for your purpose. He realizes that his focus is currency, his discipline is gold, his peace is sacred, and the more he gives it to someone who can't respect it, the more he loses who he was built to be. Low-value women can't see that. They see his time as endless, his patience as weakness, his silence as approval. So they drain him, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, until there's nothing left but the shell of a man who once had a direction, but got caught trying to save someone who never wanted to be saved. But the high-value man, he learns. He learns that no connection is worth self-destruction. He learns that his emotional energy must be earned, not extracted. And he learns that any woman who makes him question his worth isn't qualified to be near it. So he doesn't drag things out. He doesn't wait for the final betrayal. He doesn't keep the peace at the expense of his own sanity. He walks, and not with anger, with precision. Because he knows what happens when you stay too long with someone who doesn't respect your presence. You teach her that your value is negotiable, and once that's gone, so is everything else. So he chooses himself, not selfishly, but intelligently, because he's not just walking away from her. He's walking back toward the man he was always meant to be. Focused, clear, untouchable. Because once a man knows his worth, he never again entertains what drains it. You've seen the patterns now, clearly. What once felt confusing, emotional, even intoxicating, now looks calculated. Not always by intention, but by repetition, by immaturity, by a mindset that drains everything it touches. And maybe this wasn't just a video for you. Maybe it was a mirror. One that reflected back every time you stayed too long, tolerated too much, or hoped too deeply for someone who couldn't meet you there. But that's over now, because this isn't about her anymore. This is about you, and the man you're becoming every time you choose clarity over chaos. The high-value man doesn't hate women. He just refuses to rescue ones who refuse to rise. He doesn't argue with dysfunction. He outgrows it. This episode wasn't just information. It was a weapon. One that protects your peace, sharpens your standards, and reminds you, you don't need permission to protect your energy. You only need conviction. And if this felt like truth, then you're not alone. This is episode 2 of a 4-part series, a blueprint for the rare man. Not the one who chases, but the one who builds, who observes, who walks when it's time, without flinching. The next episode goes deeper, darker, sharper. You'll see things even more men miss. And by the end, you'll never be the same. Because growth doesn't happen by healing in comfort. It happens by standing in front of hard truths and not looking away. A man becomes dangerous the moment he learns to protect his peace louder than he protects her feelings. You've already begun. Now finish the war with silence, strength, and standards that never bend.